Hey everybody, on today's episode, I'm joined by Gabe Horstick. He's a Chicago real estate investor. He's been on the podcast before, and we're going to dig into what makes sense in the Chicago apartment market.
Listen, everybody, we all know that real estate is the most proven way to build wealth. But why isn't everyone wealthy from real estate then? It's hard to know where to start, and most of the education out there is just complete trash, and you end up investing your money on a series of courses instead of in real estate. That's not how this podcast works. We give you the blueprint to successful real estate investing and bring on guests actually willing to share their secrets. I started my real estate investing journey as a freshman in college when I bought my first duplex and have been in the trenches doing deals ever since. And today, I now own hundreds of millions of dollars of investment property. On this podcast, you will learn what you actually need to know to be a successful active or passive real estate investor. And we'll offer our takes on what's happening today so you can navigate this market and build wealth. I'm Drew Breneman, and this is the Breneman Blueprint.
Well, thank you for having me, and always good to catch up. I wish I saw more of you other than just being on your podcast every 12 months, but here we are, so let's do this.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for being on, Gabe. Appreciate it.
Of course,
Maybe
my pleasure.
in the meantime, we could do something besides the podcast next time.
Yeah. I just recently took up golf and, been drinking a lot of wine. So
Yeah, that's good.
Take your pick. We'll do something. But anyways, thanks for having me, and just fun to talk, and, consider you a very good friend and someone I really look up to. And it's nice to exchange ideas with people you like and respect.
Yeah, likewise. So no, I appreciate having you on. I think for those of you that might be new to the podcast, like Gabe was on episode 7, and we went for like an hour basically through his like career up to that point. And then he had a lot of really good lessons, things we clipped up and made, where a lot of lessons for the young bucks out there. So definitely, if you haven't checked out episode 7, you should. And then, but we're going to skip over to kind of how we got to this point, though. Like if you want to know how Gabe got started, check out that episode, I'd say. But then, so what kind of stuff you working on these days?
Well, working on a lot of different things. I think, as we were talking about earlier, before we started, just needing to look at things a little bit differently to make deals work, being a little more scrappy to find opportunity. Something that I've been doing a lot of over the last 18 months was taking advantage of some of the new zoning ordinances. So specifically, you're aware there's been an ordinance that was passed well over probably 24 months ago now, where you can add apartments to existing buildings in certain designated areas. They're called accessory dwelling units, also known as ADUs. So that's been a way to creatively look at existing properties. And I was recently contacted by a reporter at Cranes who had done some research on it. Apparently, I've used that program more than anyone else in the city. I think that the program was designed to obviously provide additional much needed housing in the city, and also to create affordability. And there's been some studies done that a lot of people haven't used it, because adding these units is actually extremely costly, complicated, time-consuming, and really technical. And so I've done this at about 6 different projects, maybe a total of 12 to 14 units, and it's challenging. And so I've done a lot of them, existing buildings with existing tenancy. That's been very challenging, as you can imagine, doing construction with people living around you. And then I've also done it in some new construction, empty buildings. But the obvious benefit is that if you buy a building, for instance, the first project I did it on was a 6-unit in Wicker Park. I bought it for around $1 million. Normally, I would look at that and say that's about $166,000 a unit. But in this case, it was $1 million for 8 units, so I actually was paying $125,000 a unit, which in my mind, for a gut renovation project in Wicker Park, is a really good entry point. Now, granted, 2 of those units, they're basically basement, accessory dwelling units. They're not as desirable, but still, when you take a step back and you look at it from that standpoint, $125 a door is really attractive. So I've done a number of those, and I've found that if you are very thoughtful in the engineering and the construction and the design, specifically, I've spent a lot of extra money doing what's called underpinning, where you basically take the existing structure, dig down, and you basically rebuild the whole foundation wall. It's very costly. You can end up with 8 to potentially 9-foot ceilings, and that doesn't actually feel as much like what I jokingly would call a dungeon.
Yeah,
So,
and for the underpinning, they build like almost like another foundational wall, like a mini
yeah,
wall.
yep, exactly. So it's timely and it's costly and it's just. But I think it really creates a totally different feel where on some of these units, I mean, I have some accessory dwelling units in one of my buildings. I recently completed one building. I'm starting the second adjacent building. I'm getting 250 to 275 a foot.
Nice.
So I'm hitting some pretty healthy rents on those and good chunk pricing. 3-bed, 2-bath is in the high 2000s. So, whereas the non-ADU right above it, I'm getting, let's say, 3,400 for the same unit. So there's a little bit of a discount, but as long as you have the proper drainage and infrastructure in place, you don't want these things flooding because that can be a nightmare. And I've had that, and I know you've probably had that at some point. But that's been another just, I think, avenue to make deals.
Yeah, what are you
lucrative.
What are you looking for then? Let's say at the outset of a deal, you kind of already know the areas where you can do ADU units, or
yeah. So it's sort of a funny plug. I have a software and a subscription. I think I told you it's called CityScape.
Yeah,
and so it's basically, I think I pay $100 a month, and they basically help aggregate data. So it's a place to go, and there's like 40 metrics like. Can you have a cannabis license here? Who's the alderman? What's the lot? What's the zoning? What's the ... And so this is one place to go where in one fall swoop you can see, is it in the ADU pilot area? I believe that's being expanded if it hasn't been already. But I'll basically look to see, is it in that area? And thankfully, the buildings I've done in Wicker Park, the buildings I've done in Logan, the buildings I've done in Westtown, and the buildings I've done in Lakeview, those are all in that area. So I've proceeded with doing it. It's just, after having done it, I don't know that I want to do it again, especially not in a building with residents, because there's no easy way, as we were just discussing for the podcast, to keep the peace.
Yeah.
And so, I just this morning have someone doing framing in an occupied building, and they're framing out an apartment in a basement. So I had my property manager show up with a bunch of Starbucks gift cards.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I mean, when I was doing that deal I was talking about where we added a basement unit, this is not an ADU deal. It's just, you could just get I was just able to upzone it and add another legal unit in the basement. But yeah, we were just joking before we were talking, like, what's the worst thing that's happened so far? And we had, I don't know what our contract, some of these people doing construction, I don't know what they're thinking, where we have people living there, and to do the demo, they fired up some sort of gas powered machine. And I don't know what they were doing for exhausting it, but they, started setting off like the alarm, like the carbon monoxide alarms. It was like not a safe minute there. So, but yeah, so I got a phone call pretty fast once I started doing that. Had to shut that down.
And I've had similar issues, and you're running heaters to keep the drywall from cracking, and then you have to properly vent that. And thankfully, I mean, every building I own, and I'm sure you own as well, you have carbon monoxide and smoke detectors for a reason, and you have all the life safety measures covered. But yeah, it's not particularly pleasant. Another interesting avenue I've explored is there was another zoning ordinance that changed where basically if you have a property that's located in an RM5 or higher residential zoning, you can now take advantage of TOD benefits. So I was telling you, one of the projects I recently acquired was an old Greystone mansion in East Lincoln Park where it was an RM5, about 100 feet from the Clark Street bus stop. And I was basically able to get an administrative adjustment. So not a full zoning, not ADU, but I basically was able to take that building.
I actually read about this deal because it was such a low price per unit, and someone was, I think the broker or someone was bragging. And then I get to the end of the article and it was you.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Another one.
Yeah,
yeah, but no, I mean, that was an example. This zoning ordinance has literally just rolled out, and it basically said if you're an RM5 and you hit this criteria, this criteria, this criteria, it'll work. And so a good friend of mine, broker I've done a lot of business with, brought me the opportunity. And he's like, hey, remember how we were at a Cubs game drinking beers 2 months ago and you were saying you were going to buy another building because of this criteria? He's like, I think I found one that fits right into that box. What do you think? I think I was in Hawaii at the time. I just finished doing a half marathon or something crazy, but I basically just dropped everything. I'm like, all right, here's the contract. Let's go. And thankfully, I was able to navigate that process. I think I was one of the first people to get through it. So I had a fantastic zoning attorney. I told you, Liz Butler. She's just the best in the business, in my opinion, among others I've worked with. But she basically helped me navigate that process, and I was upzoned not upzoned. I was through the process of getting an administrative adjustment within something like 75 days. So thankfully I had a patient and understanding seller. And despite the fact that I thought I was getting a really, really good deal, they were willing to hang in there. We're just great to work with. And now this old beautiful gray stone, I'm completely changing the facade. And it's been fun because it made me engage with the neighbors. So I went to each neighbor. One of the neighbors in particular that's lived there for 30 years, they were excited that I was going to turn the building around, but I went to their home and sat with them for like 3 hours on a Saturday. Nice. And explained what I was doing, who I was, that I was here to save and restore a beautiful old building, not tear it down, and to, basically just help enhance the block. So it's been funny having that experience, just being really, really in the weeds and grassroots of talking to the neighbors, because the last thing I want to do is, upset them and create any issues. But so by way of example, that deal, I think I paid about $120, $125 a unit, which is
super cheap
1990 pricing. And but now, because construction costs are higher, much more, that deal even barely makes sense. I'll probably put in about $125 to $150 a unit there.
Nice. And so just to unpack a lot of that, like TOD, so there's a transit-oriented development ordinance where if you're within a certain distance from either like a train stop or a bus stop, you can get additional density and less parking or no parking, depending.
Yes.
So because you're by a Clark Street bus stop, and you have this high enough zone, you're able to get roped into that being the TOD now.
Yes, exactly. And the biggest change with the new law was basically you can now be in a residential district. So if you were previously needing, say, a B3-2 zoning for like something that's not really even commercial, or you don't have commercial, so it's not like a commercial stretch, you can actually get the same TOD benefits from now being an RM5 or higher. Don't quote me, I'm not a zoning attorney, but you can basically get some of those same benefits. In this particular instance, there was no on-site parking, so I had to show some bike parking in the back, but this is a landlocked property, no real alley access. Makes construction obviously challenging, but it's shaking out to be a really nice deal, and it's, above all else, it's a lot of fun to do the work on it. So
yeah. That's one thing that's been it's so funny with doing these deals in Phoenix, basically, how much room there is to work. Like, we're renovating a 100-unit deal there. Just park a dumpster in your parking lot. Like, it's like so easy. Where like for you, there's no parking. Where do the workers park? Where's the dumpster go? Where's this and that? Like, everything's so tight here. Where one of the deals that we renovated, same thing, no parking, and it was like, well, you just put the dumpster in the pay parking, actually, is what we were doing for the day.
Oh, really?
And then taking it out. Who paid for the parking if we did? I don't know. My contractor's handling that. But
I have other projects. I'm doing a 50-unit right now in East Lincoln Park, and there's 6 parking spaces for about 20 construction workers. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's something too that I thought was really interesting when I moved here. A lot of the construction workers were showing up in cars.
Yeah.
I never saw that before. Like this, if you're in Arizona, like that, obviously all driving trucks. Like, so then that was more normal, but anyways, so that, because parking's tight here, and, some people are driving pretty far, but, well, no, that's very interesting. I think and also you have this, Ashland, this development deal in Ashland that I know plenty about, but tell us about that.
Yeah, no, I would love to talk about that. Very proud of that project. So basically, I think last time I was on, I don't remember when exactly, but we had just started that. I'd gone through the fundraising process, and that project's going really well. We're more or less on time, close to being on budget. Construction costs have, as you're aware, really spiked, and it's really exciting to now see some of the costs coming down. For instance, I'm doing now a little bit of my own general contracting on some of my new projects, and I'm starting to buy my own lumber, and a board is now back to $2-3. So I think we're seeing things come down, supply chains normalizing, but the project has gone really well. We're going to start the lease-up process pretty much in the beginning of the next 2 weeks. I have a kickoff call right after this.
How big is the deal?
Oh,
the
right. Yes. Great question.
So
the building at 3821 North Ashland was basically a site that was about 15,000 square feet. We bought the plans and permit from another developer who had already been through entitlements because we really liked the deal and it fit our goals and our criteria. And it's about a overall $15 million build, 48 apartments averaging around 800 square feet. largely concentrated to one bedrooms, some affordability required per the affordable requirement ordinance, and just shaking out really nice. I mean, it was funny. Something else we were talking about is that rents have gone up so much in Chicago that I believe will handily, don't want to jinx myself, beat our rent forecast by worst case 10%, but maybe by 20%. And so let's say maybe that was a 6% unlevered return that has the ability to jump that into hopefully the low sevens. So while we're now looking at if we do keep it being in a higher interest rate environment, the revenues are really making it up, and I think a lot of people are seeing that on their projects. But yeah, overall, it's really exciting. We something we'd never done was we actually set up a construction cam, so we have basically time lapse videos for marketing and for our investors to basically log in and see what's happening. And it's a beautiful building. I'm really pleased with the aesthetic. Right now, we're just doing our weekly meetings to get into the gritty of the finishes and all those other details, cabinets, tile, lighting, etc. And it's very exciting. I mean, it's a big one, and we'll see what happens. I mean, we're entertaining, selling it at completion, but I certainly wouldn't mind hanging on to it. It's West Lakeview, Southport corridor, steps to Southport, and a very exciting project. And I'm excited to see what kind of cap rate we can hit on a potential exit.
Yeah, where I used to live, I drove by that basically every day.
Yeah,
nearly.
Have you seen it? Late, or?
Well, now living in the West Loop.
Oh,
I'm never up there, but yeah, where I used to be. But yeah, I know that at the time was like a big jump up in size and also new development. So maybe you had bought larger deals but not built it. So I know that was it's a lot of pieces to put together.
Yeah. No, thankfully I'm very blessed. I have a fantastic general contractor who's a partner in the deal, so he's super excited and motivated to be successful. And you have to. I'm used to being super involved in the general contracting. Like I'm there, on some of these rehabs, I'll get a 2x4 and get on my hands and knees and get a Sharpie out and start like playing with layouts. And this is just very different. It happens quickly, and you got 48 units. 12 different layouts, so it's hard to be on top of everything. But really just having the right team, having a great designer, having great millworking people and other relationships of different subs to kind of work through problems, it's gone pretty well, and I'm excited to show it to you when it's done. I think we'll have a model unit done by sometime in March of this year, and then hopefully have a certificate of occupancy late May for partial. And that's really the scariest part about some of these projects is, whether it be a new construction or a rehab, is that you could, by all accounts, have a very clear path to having a CFO June 1, start signing leases, and then, an inspector shows up and you forgot a fire strobe there. You tell all those people moving in June 1 they need to get a hotel. It's very stressful, but you also want to start leasing it up and have an assumption you're going to hit those deadlines. It's just, you never know. You catch someone on the right day or not. So.
Yeah, and it's real important here with the seasonality of the rental market to be.
Oh, absolutely.
You're more or less on a perfect schedule right now, where you get your model unit done in March, start renting for the summer.
Yeah,
that's when the rents are the highest.
Well, and that's the thing. In the summer, it's either June 1, July 1, or August 1. And, that was one of the discussions we had with our leasing team was if you guys miss any of those dates, you might have 10% lower revenue, and that's going to result to a commensurate drop in value if you do want to sell or refinance. So timing is everything. I've had other projects that 20 unit I've just recently completed the first phase of in Logan Square, and during the inspection process, someone didn't like the height of the basement, and that delayed me 3 months. So a building that should have been delivered and potentially full cash out refi in September of 22 is now leasing into spring of 2023. And rates went up 100 basis points in that window. But as long as you finish it and you get it full and you have the people in there, all's well that ends well. And
it's a long-term game. There you go.
Great minds.
So that's funny. Yeah, that's where it's hard to get hurt when you have like a longer term mindset. That's why I knew that's where you're going with it. That's how exactly. I would think too.
Yeah. So.
But yeah, that's interesting. I know our youth rehabs, when you do rehabs and new construction, people say the rehabs are actually harder. And it certainly, that's what it seemed like when I've done rehabs, where it's like you see a new building being built like around the corner, and they're going faster because they don't need to open up the walls and be like, what do we got here? They're just building the wall, and it's all just to the plan quicker. It seems like. What's it like for you?
Well, the thing is, me doing $1 million to $5 million rehab, I'll be more involved in the day to day. And in this instance, my partner's providing what's almost a white glove experience. So it's just different. It's funny. You can do 5 of these and, try and dedicate an hour to 3 hours a week. Whereas some of these rehabs, if you really want to perfect the formula, you have to be there. I'm at the 50 unit I'm doing in East Lincoln Park. I'm there because I also live in the area, and I actually enjoy it in a sort of sick way.
Yeah,
I like torturing myself. I like being there for a couple hours a day just to see the progress daily, make sure the framing and layout's just right, make sure the aesthetics just right. And I think that's something that people that have partnered with me is that I'm obsessed with some of those details. It's the German engineering mindset and genetics a little bit, but you never know. I mean, I'm doing a project right now where I think I told you previously, I'm about to have my general contractor's license. I'm trying to add that vertical to my existing platform. And so I'm responsible for pouring, new concrete foundation walls and whatnot. And I showed up with tape measure, and we're off by about 6 inches. And I'm like, okay, do I need to take that out? Am I going to build a deck on top of it? And then someone from the city shows up and gets out a tape measure and it's off by a few inches, and that's pretty scary. Whereas with a new build, it's like, well, yeah, like here it is. This is okay. Like it's more exact. And I think the rehab is just more of an art. Because also, too, I've started numerous rehabs, and I'm sure you have as well, where it's like, I'm going to save that, I'm going to save that, I'm going to save that. And then you come back 3 months later, and you're like, God damn it, just torch it all. Like, I'm just going to.
Well, that's the issue. Once you start putting new things next to the old, no matter how nice the old looks, it looks old. It looks bad now.
Yeah.
Like where we do that too, where it's like, okay, that light actually looks great. So does that fan and this whatever. And then once you're done with the unit, you're like, why'd we leave this old fan in here? Like, what's the deal?
Yeah.
But it's like, yeah, it looked great next to all the other old stuff, but now that was in worse shape. But now next to new stuff, you're like, why were we doing that?
Well, and I think you see things the average renter or consumer doesn't, and that's why you're doing what you're doing, and I'm doing what I'm doing. Is you have an eye for things, and you want things just so. And sometimes it's nice to remove yourself, but if you really care, you're going to be there and make sure it gets done right. So, but yeah, rehab is just the damnedest things can happen, and really, I think the worst part right now is just the time for a permit. So you can be doing everything by the book, but you'll just have a building sitting for months because you're waiting on a permit. So
what's that timeline like?
I mean, it really varies. It's funny. I renovated a historic mansion in East Lakeview, and that permit took 9 months. And the contractor I was working with was nervous about starting work without it, which is not technically allowed, and you really shouldn't. But we sat for 9 months with a demolished, empty building. 9 months. Thankfully, rates were low at the time, and we had a comfortable amount to carry. But I've seen more typically 60 to 90 days. It really depends. I mean, some of these buildings have a landmark hold, like the buildings I've done in Logan. And then this one in East Lincoln Park, it's orange. It's orange rated. So, let's have someone at the city just sit and look at it for an extra couple weeks and say, oh, okay, no, it's good. But anyways. No,
that's why I started laughing, where it's like, this is like could be really stressful for somebody.
Yeah, no, it's stressful. No, it can obviously be very stressful, but it's also a lot of fun. And you just feel like that you'll never get the permit, and then you get a call, and it's like, hey, great news, we're in that final stage. I'm like, oh, so I'll have a permit tomorrow. No, you'll have it in 2 weeks. It's like, but they literally someone just needs to pull a lever. But that's what's funny about Chicago. As much as I love it, it's just some of this stuff. It's just you don't understand the labyrinth of permitting and the process and everything. And I've heard anecdotally, I mean, I did one project up in Wilmette, and I think we got the building permit there in like 5 days. And it was a big build. It was 40,000 square foot with underground structured parking.
Wow.
So I've just heard, I don't know if you've had this experience in other markets you've been in, where the inspector shows up the next day.
Yeah, they do. In the Phoenix market, they do.
Yeah.
Where it's always, and same thing with evictions, where it's like, oh, wow, we need to evict someone. How long is that going to take? And like, I don't know, like a week, maybe 2. If we get like bad timing. Where it's crazy, they're out in the same month you started.
Funny thing I read, to get a little bit off topic, was that Chicago is historically one of the bigger and better rental markets because a percentage of total, there's so many renters, but it's also the most renter friendly and least landlord friendly. And that's kind of obvious to you and I, but they make it challenging. I mean, if you get a bad renter or bad credit in there, I mean, you're going to have to strike a deal. There's no property rights for the landlord. But
yeah, I think that in some markets though, that creates it's actually like at the end of the day, I think, right, that creates a lot of headaches for the landlord, what you're talking about. But in some of these places, that makes the values higher because there's less development. Like, why are the prices so high in San Francisco? Rent control, and you can't go over a certain height. That's why. Like, it's not that complicated. You're restricting the units, and you're making everything a hassle. All the old buildings have rent control, so those units are almost like not in the marketplace. If I was living in a 1970s building in San Francisco paying $800, I'd probably be planning my entire life around how do I not mess up my $800 deal, and then I'd stay forever. Like hold me back, basically.
Yeah.
But then, let's say me and you move to San Francisco, and we want to pick out an apartment. We only can pick from the non-rent control ones, so that's why the price is so high.
Yeah.
And then so all these extra, all the red tape, all these restrictions, that depending on what it is, actually makes it sometimes better for the landlord in a weird way, where like that's why the price is so high and appreciation's been so high there. Makes it a nightmare running it, obviously, dealing with all this. But if you could just get a permit in a day, well, maybe there'd be more buildings here.
Well, and that's, it's funny, people talk about just Chicago, the out-migration, it's going to hell in a handbasket. And it's funny, I think in the good areas, the buildings are being very well absorbed. And I think construction inevitably, as a result of higher interest rates, is going to come down. And it is coming down because people that had projects on the books at, they were assuming a 4.5%, 5% rate. Now they're at 6 or higher or high 5s. Even at like the most aggressive pricing, a lot of those are not going to get done. I think it's just going to further exacerbate the supply issue of having a lack of affordable housing. That's why I think it has been nice to see some positive moves by leadership in Chicago and City Hall that basically have said, we're going to if you got a spare space in your building, make it a unit. If you got, a property that meets this criteria, we're going to allow you to add density, like the building I did in East Lincoln Park, the 7-unit. You're going to add density without going through a 90 to 180 day to 360 day neighborhood process, which I think is important because we're all neighbors and we want to be good neighbors. We want to understand what's being built and what's happening in our community. But, it really varies. And that's why certain neighborhoods in Chicago just haven't seen any new supply. This is the hurdles, the hoops.
Speaking of the city, if you heard that chainsaw, we got our taxpayer dollars hard at work. Fantastic. Somebody trimming the trees here.
So does that mean there's 4 guys trimming one branch and 3 of them are here to
you need the watchers. You need the supervisors.
Joking, of course.
Someone's got to make sure that the truck doesn't get stolen.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's interesting. I mean, you got any thoughts around mindset or anything that maybe you think about differently at this point, like compared to when you first started out, or?
Yeah, well, I mean, everyone's journey is special and different, and something we talked about. I remember you were at this point in your career where all of a sudden just a lot of things clicked, and it was with you starting, your new company and having a lot of other exciting transitions in your life, and all of a sudden, you did a hockey stick. You were at maybe 90%, very very high functioning, and I think. I'm very impressed. You're tapping into that next 10.
Got to the last 100.
You're right. No, I mean, and that's the thing. It's hard to break through that because, when you get to that little extra, then things really, you sort of surprise yourself. So, like, for me, it was just having not done some of these larger transactions and then just sort of getting in the mindset of it. It's the same thing. And if you're good at managing expectations and relationships and you're careful and you're judicious, I'm sure you're at the same place where you just look back and you're like, why didn't I do fewer, bigger deals? And
it's easy to
not, but you have your whole life and career ahead of you to do that. And it's better to figure that out sooner. But I think that's, for me, as I was saying earlier, just breaking out of the mindset and just realizing it's the same thing. And it's really about your brand and your reputation. And if you perform well at one level, then, add a zero, double, triple, quadruple it. It's more or less the same principle.
Yeah, the only thing I've really noticed on bigger deals is actually like two things. Usually the people working on them, so like let's say the lender's attorney or even the lender, just kind of everybody, the broker, like they're actually better at their jobs. Like they're more skilled. They're in the higher priced deals. So in a weird way, like that makes it easier. Like everyone's like a player. Like if you're buying a small deal, who knows like how good the seller's attorney is. But if you're buying like a $30 million deal, like the seller will have a good attorney. So that's been one. And then the deals, all the timelines are longer. So like if let's say when I bought that 6 unit and did some light renovations in the 6 units and added the unit in the basement, I was done in like 6 months with all that, give or take. And I applied for my permit while I was buying it, like your example as well. So like that deal was done in, 6 to 9 months, where if you're buying a 100 unit, I mean, to be done in 6 to 9 months, you'll be renovating like 15, 20 units a month. Like it's not possible now. So now your renovation, that it's when you could just blow through there and I'll just end all the leases, the 6 of them at one time, and just knock it all out in the summer. We'll re-rent it by August. It's easy peasy. Well, if you're buying a 100 unit, you can't do that. And it's like a 3-year odyssey of renovating a lot. And then you get started late on like doing, let's say, the common area amenities or your pool renovation or the club. Like there's just so much to do. Like that's been the only difference. It's not like you can't do it. It's just like there's more stuff to do. So it's not like this can be a 6-month deal now. And then you got to think there's almost more thought around sequencing. Like, okay, you're finishing units, but your exterior still looks like junk. You're not gonna like get that rent bump you thought. So you got to be like sort of strategic with what you start. I guess that's been what I've learned.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and it's funny because I've enjoyed hearing about working on more garden properties where you have, like you said, in Arizona, you have space, whereas here, there, the front curb appeal is a $10,000 job. Like you have shrubs, you have some pavers. It's not creating this whole exterior experience. So that's obviously a little bit different. But,
like on one deal, we're like already spent like $250,000 on the outside. We're not done. Like $100,000 repainted the whole building. 150 on landscaping. These are round numbers, but then we gotta make the pool deck look nicer, get pool furniture, and then we're done.
Well, and that's what's funny. I mean, executing a good deal here, I mean, in my mind, a lot of that comes down to timing. And I've bought buildings in May and basically just sat on it, even empty, with a permit in hand and said, let's wait, because I know this particular crew is really fast and I don't want to be delivering units with a fully funded loan in January. So let's take a beat here and let's wait. And so it's funny, I have a project like that now down by UIC, and we bought it in April. I was getting married at the time, not an excuse to drop a ball, but I left for my honeymoon and we just started day one. And it's like, oh, perfect, February, bring those units on in a student market. So yeah, I mean, timing is really everything. And that's the thing. I mean, the ideal timeline in Chicago, in my mind, is you buy it between September, July, August. I guess that doesn't really matter. It depends on what you're doing.
Yeah, right. And it depends when you're getting your permit and when your lease is in. Because I mean, your timing assumes the building's almost empty. Like you might need to buy it in the spring, get those leases to end at a time you want, like in the fall, then start. I mean, depends on the deal.
Funny concept I'd like to introduce to you that I learned from a friend of mine who's a fantastic broker and another really brilliant entrepreneur in the real estate world. He described to me when you're doing a repositioning and you have a bunch of tenants and you have to cut deals to move them around the property into other units, or you need to do work in their unit, or you just have to figure something out to move the pieces on the chessboard. He calls that a mini deal. So we bought a building in East Lincoln Park, and there were 20 occupied units out of 50. And everyone knew the building was being sold. It was been a long, drawn-out, arduous process of marketing. I mean, talking 9 months. And people were staying because the rent was very low. And, we believe in working with the residents and helping them with relocation and giving them bonuses to help their situation, because we feel that's the right thing to do. But we did 20 mini deals. and we were able to basically buy a 50-unit building completely vacant and start the renovation within 7 days of closing. And because we did that, I'm very optimistic we can basically condense the delivery of 50-unit full gut renovation from an October acquisition to a June delivery and lease up, which is kind of wild.
Yeah, that's fast.
And that's the thing. I mean, hitting June 1, July 1 versus hitting November 1, it's like that really changes your economics because, you know, you might have a 3-year interest only loan. And if you can turn around a project in 9 months and still enjoy 27, 28 months of interest only, that really changes things. Also, your interest reserve is, you use half of it. So,
right. Well, and most importantly, you deliver the units in the peak rental season, and you have a way higher value, and everything starts at the right time.
And does Arizona have the same seasonality?
They have some seasonality, but it's totally different. Their peak rental season would be January to May.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So then because it gets real hot in the summer, so there is a slowdown there. They say, and then you get into like school's already started and holidays. So, but it's not anywhere close to like here where rents could be. I mean, on like a lot of my deals, I'd say depends on how big the unit is. The bigger the unit, the worse, the bigger the drop in Chicago. But I mean, yeah, you miss between the May and September time, rents are 10 to 20% lower.
Yeah, or you got to offer concessions, and I mean, you kick the can down the road, but that's not ideal. And so it's funny even working on new projects and just trying to tee up like, okay, if it's going to take 15 months to build and I want to deliver May 1, let's reverse engineer that. We may own the site, and I mean, it's unfortunate when you miss the window to break ground, but timing is everything, really. And so, you know, and no one knows the future of interest rates, and so that's why there's obviously a good amount of risk there. Especially on the new builds. But.
Yeah. And then I guess to back up, one thing I did want to hear about was the ADU deals. And I don't know if we covered everything there, but just to kind of
of course,
reiterate, like, so the CityScape, it's called.
Oh yeah, right.
I follow them on Twitter. So
that was a plug. And I'm a huge fan of that group because they lobby for density and they lobby for new housing. And they're a great group of guys. It was founded by a gentleman named Steve Vance, and he's a great guy. I've gotten to know him over the years. And so I use that tool to basically go in and basically put an address in. It'll just shoot out distance to the bus line, distance to the train. I mean, there's other places to get this, but, you know, you go into 6 websites, you go to one.
But then let's say just for ADU.
Yeah.
So you go there, it says that it's in the pilot program. Yeah. Then what's the next? Like, let's maybe go through kind of the ADU steps.
Of course.
Actually.
So ADU is only permitted, I believe, in an RT4 zoning. There's like a certain range of residential zoning. So, for instance, I do not believe it is allowed in the lowest residential zoning designation, which is RS. But again, they've changed the rules to make it so more people do it because they realize that not a lot of people have done it or been able to figure it out. So basically with the ADU, it'll look at, is it in the designated zone? And I know that's being revisited and potentially expanded, but is it in the zone? And it basically creates this checklist that says it's in the zone. Yes. Okay. Next step. It is this type of zoning. It's an RT4 qualified. Yes. These are other criteria that are met. I mean, that's really the main criteria. And then you just have to look at the building. Can you physically do it? Is there an empty basement? Is there, if it's 3 or 4 dwelling units, more or less, is there a place in back to build a coach house? I mean, I'm looking at helping some of my investors build coach houses behind their buildings, just more or less because it's fun and I want to figure it out. And unfortunately, the cost of that is prohibitive. So I think there's only been like a handful of them built. But on a bigger scale, doing this, what I'm describing, I mean, I looked at, almost bought a 30 unit that had like 6 empty spaces in it where I could have added 6 units and done it pretty well. But yeah, so this program will basically show if it qualifies. And for instance, if it's for whatever reason a residential building but in a B zoning, it'll say does not qualify and here's why. So it helps filter that. And I mean, I've certainly gotten a lot of value out of it, and then I'll also use it for looking at other sites. So it's pretty clever. It's layering in all this different data and putting it in one place. It's not to say you couldn't go out and find it, but good luck going to the City of Chicago website and finding like a map or a program or anything that's user friendly. And that's basically the value and service that that this website provides, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I mean, if that's what you're doing, and that's what you want to do, it's really helpful.
And so the steps, though, you like, for starters, find out if it makes sense. This plugin or app will make that easy. But then you physically need to be really the deals that are penciling. Like you're adding the unit within an existing building. To build an extra unit in a coach house, building an entire structure is not penciled. It's been too expensive.
I think it's very challenging because you can only build, I think, up to 700 or 800 square feet. And so, again, I'm helping some of my partners and friends just figure it out, line up an architect I usually know or have worked with, and they're creating plans, but it's not that simple. You know, when you're doing the rear coach house, which I've never really done just because I haven't had occasion to do it, I've always opted to do the unit in the basement because it's just, I can potentially end up with a much bigger unit. And you just need to make sure the return on cost is there. So for instance, one of them that I did in the second building I ever bought, I was able to, for let's say around $240,000, I was able to create a 3-bedroom, 3-bath that I'm renting for around $40,000 a year. That makes sense. But if I was spending $180,000 and creating a little studio that I'm going to rent for $1,200, like, that's a little more challenging. So it kind of depends on what you want to do. I think the coach house is more designed as like an ancillary space. For instance, I think it could be like a good space for like a nanny or an in-law. Or
yeah, on like a single family situation.
Yeah, on a single family situation.
But I don't think it'll make sense on a rental.
No, I don't. I think it barely makes any sense. But I
well,
think
if you want to have your like mother-in-law living in a different building, like that, you know,
if you own a nice
money's
home,
only so much.
Exactly.
You know?
If you own a nice home, I think it makes a lot of sense. But unfortunately, they limit the size, and you know, well-intentioned. I just don't think it's as effective or successful as they think. But what I like about it is, like, an example for someone young getting started. Here's an example of how I think you could kill it. You go on the MLS and you find a 3-unit, but ideally you find a 4-unit. And I'll give you an example. I was this close to buying a 4-unit building at Southport and Belmont. It was on the MLS. I have no idea why it didn't sell quicker, but it was the opportunity to buy a 4-unit that was in decent shape, and it had an unfinished attic, unfinished basement, 4 units, 2 front, 2 back, kind of back to back, like one of my other properties. And I was able to, hypothetically, had I bought it, take a 4-unit that I could have bought for about $800,000. So like not an outlandish entry point, price point to get in, but now divide $800,000 by 5. It's in Lakeview. For the units, probably could do with a cosmetic rehab, but for another $200,000, I could basically dig out the basement and potentially put in an English garden apartment, meaning it's an ADU, but it's like not total subterranean. It's got light and vent that's relatively high. For $200,000, add a unit that maybe could rent out for, again, $30,000 to $40,000 a year. But also, 4-unit buildings are sometimes not as sought after as 5-unit buildings because, as you know, a 5-unit building can get more commercial-oriented financing. And so, if you bought this and you went from a 4-unit to a 5-unit, you can all of a sudden get an agency loan, non-recourse. All of a sudden, you're getting much more attractive financing terms. And, I think also, too, when you're out looking at and identifying that type of property and opportunity, a lot of people rule those out. And so here, this particular property, it was literally on Southport in Belmont. It was in a beautiful building. It was framed, but you could make it nice. And I had penciled that out to be potentially an 8% unlevered return on a full cash out refi within 12 months. That's a good deal.
Yeah.
You can't do 10 of those a year because it would be exhausting. And also, do you vacate the building? What do you do? But that building also could have had a coach house. And I'm like, well, the coach house could get this much. This unit can get this much. And so it's just, I've looked at buying and doing properties like this because they're like in this sort of little weird area where they're too small for someone a little more sophisticated that's searching the MLS or whatever for 5 units and up. And they're just, they're not too big necessarily for people. People just don't know about
there's
it.
too many steps for someone starting out. Like, I don't know if you have this experience where when you're first starting out, you might walk into like a frame building. So this like everywhere else would be a normal building. So not a brick building when you say frame. And there's like so much to do in it. It's almost like overwhelming. The floors aren't straight and it's like you don't even know where to begin. I don't know. That's how I felt when I was
yeah.
starting out, where now it's the opposite, where it's like you know how to fix everything. We're like, yeah, you could just take that out, switch the joints, like where you just at least know what's available to you. So it feels easy now. We're like, yeah, unlevered return. You just renovate the whole thing, get the ADU approved, build a unit. But like though most of those steps they don't know how to do.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. It's funny. I recently was with a young man who wanted to network, and I'm like, wow, you're frighteningly like me 15 years ago. I really like you. I want to mentor you. And it's funny because we went through a building together. I barely, he just found me on LinkedIn, saw an article I was in or something, and I ended up meeting with them, and we really hit it off. And, it's funny. That's how friendships and business relationships get started. But it was funny because we went through a building together that was being listed by a friend of mine, and I was aware of it. I had seen it, and I went through it, and someone else had already done the copper. Someone else had put in central heating, cooling. Someone else had put in laundry. The finishes weren't amazing, but that to me is an entry-level type opportunity. It's like, all right, I can go in and hypothetically paint it myself or do things you even physically as human can do. That's a lot less daunting and probably a better place to start. I mean, you obviously have done this where you're adding a unit or you're digging or whatever, and yeah, that's a little freaky. Yeah, I mean, really, because you're dealing with structural, and maybe you don't have the right contractor, and that I think is daunting, and so maybe doing an ADU isn't the best place to
start. But I mean, I'm just in terms
of
the steps. So you need to identify where ADUs are allowed. You need to it physically needs to be able to fit in the building.
Yeah, exactly.
So you need the ceiling height to be pretty high. Obviously, you can dig down the basement, add some height, but not much, because when you put a new concrete floor, it's bigger, it's thicker than the old floor, just the way we're doing concrete now, right? Where we're doing this more gravel and then it's thicker or something.
Right.
So you think you can dig the basement down, you don't get as much height as you thought. But like what's like a minimum basement height in your mind?
I think 8 feet is great. 7.6 feels a little cramped, but the minimum I think per code is probably 7.3. But I'm going through this exercise right now on a unit I'm doing in Lakeview where I opted to spend an extra 25 grand to underpin an 800 square foot unit because I'm like, well, I've had it forever. I just want to do it. I want to see how it goes. So I just did it. And it was a lot of work and required a structural engineer. And the structural engineer took 3 months to turn plans. It just added a lot of time and hassle. Funny side note is whenever I buy a building I'm going to rehab, one of the first things I do during due diligence, if I can get away with it, meaning the seller authorizes it, is I'll send my concrete subcontractor out with a sledgehammer and a shovel, and we'll make some exploratory holes, see what we have. Because then I can appropriately budget it.
For what the
for what the footing is. Yeah, and you basically just get a sledgehammer and crack it open and dig a little bit and and so I've done this. I mean, I've pre-closing. You need to tell them what's going on or have some sort of permission that if you don't close, you'll restore it. But it's a nice way to see, understand, budget, and then implement it into your plans so that you don't deal with what I dealt with at another project where I got delayed for 3 months because the basement was 6 inches too deep, not following the plans. It just depends on what kind of day you catch that inspector on. So.
But yeah, it needs to be physically there space-wise, and then going to need to pencil where from like what the rents need to be high enough. So these units where they're just almost like fully below grade have a feel like that, those aren't going to get that higher rents. You need to have some sort of real windows, even if it's just like along the walkway in between the building. Like they need, in terms of from like a rentability, and not from like the building code. Just if you need to. Because if it's going to cost $200,000, and that sounds like a crazy amount of money to most people, but you're spending so much money potentially adding windows, you're digging out the basement, you're putting new concrete floor down. Also, you need to do new drain tile and an ejector pump and sump pump and all this extra stuff that goes in. Mm-hmm. You might have broke your sewer line for the building when you're digging out the basement, so or your sewer might have been broken, and now you're looking at it and going, well, I can't leave my broken sewer here. It was working before when it was just going into the ground, but now I need to fix it. Like, so that's how it can be $200,000 because you're spending, I don't know, $50,000 out of the gate just doing all that stuff I just mentioned.
It's wild. But now the thing I would say conversely to that is if you're in a high value per unit, high rental area per unit, per foot or chunk price, I mean, you do the math, and the one I'm adding now, where I'm general contracting it myself to keep things really lean and just try it, see how it goes. That I'm doing for about $180,000, give or take, and I anticipate getting hopefully around 2,400. So 2,400, let's say that annualizes to 30,000. Multiply that by 12.
Right.
12 multiple Lakeview, maybe it could even be higher. So 12 times that, that's
360.
360. We're numbers guys. Okay. I mean, I'm a little slow-witted today, but so 360 on 180. Okay, like that, that, and that's bankable.
Yeah, no, that makes
that's
sense.
Bankable
Yeah,
cash flow, or
it's a legal unit.
Yeah,
you can
legal
go
unit.
refi on that.
Yeah,
or,
exactly. And so then all of a sudden you can go in, and I think I told you I had that building. I told you on our first podcast where I bought a 4-flat for under $600,000, and then I found an obscure city record that actually said it's 6 units. And so for $250,000, I added 2 apartments there, and then I somehow wound up with like a $2 million valuation and $1.5 million loan on it, after a couple of years.
There you go.
But, past performance is not indicative of future results, as we say.
Right. You do better on the next one.
Yeah, right. right,
We'll
right.
be all in for no, just kidding. But yeah, so you met that one guy you were mentoring on LinkedIn. How did we meet? You remember?
So it's funny. We met because I was at Wells Fargo and you were working for a real estate company that was very big, and you were basically like the really credible part of the team. Not that I don't think anyone else wasn't, but some of my coworkers were like, yeah, we're working with this guy that went to Madison. He's really young. And I had found out what you were doing, and then I think I met you we were on a boat for the Wisconsin Alumni Association. There's some event, and we kind of hit it off. And then I just checked in with you and said, hey, I'm looking at starting deals. How do you do it? And, you're like, oh, it's real simple. I just do this. I'm like, really? Oh, wow. And then, one thing led to another. And you moved here, and, we became better friends and got to know each other really well. And that's my recollection. I don't know if you remember it differently or remember at all.
I don't remember the Wells Fargo where I was an employee part.
You weren't an employee at Wells Fargo. You were... I was working at Wells Fargo, and you were working for a developer that was a prospect or a client.
That's what I'm saying. I don't remember that Wells Fargo relationship. I remember...
I think there was one meeting.
Yeah.
And then I knew who you were, and then I don't really know how to connect the remaining dots, but somehow I followed up with you and said, I think what you're doing is really interesting. Did you expand on that? And, I was just... And that's what's funny though about this business is when you know who people are and you're willing to talk. I'm happy to talk to anyone. It's fun. Like I like sharing my passion, and the more I'm like excited about it, the more people want to do deals with me. And
yeah,
more and more begets more. So
also one thing as a tip, if you're gonna ask somebody a question, don't ask, "Can I ask a question?" I get sent messages all on LinkedIn, Twitter, everywhere. Can I ask you a question? You should have just asked the question. Like I would like to respond to your question, but if I have to then say yes, and then it's another step. Now it's making friction for me. Where just if you need to ask someone a question, ask them a question.
You're a busy guy. You have a lot going on. And
I get a lot of those messages. Like, can I ask a question? Well, I'm less likely to respond to that. If you just ask a question, I'll respond.
Well, embarrassingly enough, I wasn't on LinkedIn or actually using it for about a year and a half. My wife finally went on and was like, "Hey, you know all these people want to talk to you?" And you get overwhelmed and you sort of avoid it. It's like I don't use Facebook. I don't know. Not my shtick.
If you don't log into LinkedIn for a while, it's like everything's blinking and there's too many messages.
Yeah. Well, like they say, manage your reputation or someone else will for you.
Yeah.
So.
But yeah, I remember that. What did that is what I remember for how we met as well. What did I tell you for how I was doing the deals?
You just basically said, yeah, we just do this real simple structure and I get 20% and that's that. I'm like, wow, okay. How do I get that? And but you explained the value proposition, and it really helped me think about things differently and how you have a value prop. And it's funny. It's something we've talked about extensively, and I look forward to discussing further after this at lunch. Is that what is equitable and what is fair and what is market really depends on how you want to align interests. That's a whole nother topic, but I traditionally have tried to do really simple equity structures because I believe that there's a way to better align interests. And if you have prefs and waterfalls and all these triggers that basically get you as the developer to the promote, as it's known, where you get extra percentage income or profit, et cetera, you're going to do everything you can just to get to that point. And that might mean that maybe a building can sell for more money in 2 years, or something else could be different. You're going to race to that finish line as quickly as possible. Whereas maybe you want to keep a building.
Yeah. You know? And to unpack what you're saying, like that, probably the most common structure for like someone getting paid that has investors is you have they invest money, then they get a preferred return. So there's a determined percentage. They get that percent of the return. They get their money back, and then they start splitting disproportionately. And like, let's say a normal structure would be 8% pref, return of capital, and start splitting like 70-30 or 80-20. Then maybe once it gets to another higher return, then there's a bigger split to the sponsor. Anyways, so that's all well and good, but then the sponsor, the person with the deal, goes, okay, I don't get paid till we sell. I need to charge a fee to buy it then. So then we got an acquisition fee. And I need a fee to run it, asset management fee. I need a fee to property manage it, property management fee. And so you're that's the most common structure. And what you're talking about is, I had an individual who you would explain that, and it's like, well, that is like really complicated. And also, so you just like buy a deal and make money day one. Like, that's how he took that structure. Mm-hmm. It wasn't, and me, I'm thinking is like, I would get paid at the end. Like, okay, like that's, so what we settled on was let's just split 80-20 at the outset. I do the work, you put in the money, you get the money back when we sell, no fees. So I do all the work to buy it and run it, and I'll make 20% of whatever the deal makes. Mm-hmm. And yeah, like at the time that seems too simple, but when you talk to just a regular person who isn't in this, I need to promote I need a preferred return and you'll charge your fees. And it's interesting when you have like a fresh lens. That's why we ended up in that structure, was more like the investors were asking for it. Mm-hmm. And the other people that I know that have ended up doing something similar, it's the investors were asking for it. They were saying like, this is a nice property and you're saying we need to sell it, but we should just keep it. But then you're like, what? We set it up where you're basically forcing me to sell it.
Yeah.
Because so that's why we ended up on that. And what's interesting, where I'm going with this is, sure, if your partner is Blackstone or a private equity company, you can ignore this. They're gonna do this one structure. It's what everybody does. But if it's an individual, you can have a talk like this and go, well, actually, we want to own this property for 5 years, and then maybe we want to do a 1031 and buy another one, buy a bigger one. So why would we set this up where I'm getting, I need to wait to sell to get anything, and then you're be motivating me to sell? Why don't we just do something simple, split? Mm-hmm. Maybe I'll put in 5% of the equity, and then we'll split 80-20 or something. Mm-hmm. Something simple. And then what happens is, like those deals I told you, this would have been in 2009, we were talking, probably 2010. I still own almost all those buildings because there's no gun to my head to sell. Yeah, or we did sell them. Like one of the deals I owned when we would have been talking was an office building. We put $900,000 down. We realized it was a deal we wanted to sell. We sold it 4 or 5 years later. We doubled our money. It was like a normal deal. And instead of just like, all right, wash our hands, we're done, time to get my promote, we did a 1031 into a bigger deal. We doubled what we had already doubled in the next one. So we 4x'd our money by then. And then we sold that as well, and then bought another 2 big shopping centers. And now, so we started out, we bought a $4 million office building. With the same money, we own $18 million of shopping centers. And every year, the cash flow and the loan paid on that is 800-something thousand. So just on like a simple guy math, it's like we almost make 100% a year now with no appreciation.
Can I ask you a question? That was meant to be a joke.
So I didn't answer it.
Okay, sorry, I can't help myself. Can I invest with you? It sounds like I'm just, God, it would be a lot less stressful.
It would
if
be.
I wanted to, is there an email or I'm just
yeah, no, I know. Anyone listening to this knows where to go. Breneman.com/invest. Okay. But yeah, that, how about,
so you're guaranteeing that if I invested $800,000, I basically make 100% annualized return if
you were in that deal, this and the next one, we'll see. But be sure to watch the disclaimer at the end of the episode for what we can. Yeah. But so point being, in a way, it's like because we had a simple structure where somebody would have said like, oh, you're giving 20%. What if the deal, because the downside to just, let's say, splitting 80-20 is, let's say the deal made 5% total, like per year. And I still would have got 20. So then your return would have been 4% a year, and that's not a good deal. Where if you had the pref to protect you, you would have got the whole 5%. I would have only got my fees. But so there is a downside to like just splitting straight up, let's say 80-20 or something. But like there's also a lot of potential upside in that example where we now have rolled this money over. And you know what we're going to do once we own these shopping centers for 10 years? Because we have a 10-year loan at a 3.25% interest rate. So and also it's retail. So we bought them at like mid 6 caps. This is in 2019. Once our loan's over, you know what we're going to do? It's going to be the same thing, rinse and repeat. It's like, oh, this $8 and $9 million building we bought, they're worth 13, 14 now. We paid our loans down to $5 million, and we'll be rolling our $20 million into something.
Breneman blueprint right there, baby.
So, all right, how do people get in touch with you if they want the Gabe blueprint?
The Gabe blueprint. Well, let's see here. Go on to my website. It's www.base3co.com. I have a simple email, Gabe at base3co, BASE3co.com, or I'm on LinkedIn, but just email me because I don't ever check that. But that would be the best way to reach me if you wanted to talk, shop, or anything else. So,
well, you crushed it, Gabe. Thanks for coming on.
Hey,
appreciate
thanks
it,
for having me. This is a lot of fun.
Awesome.
If you learned something from today's show, leave a review and hit that subscribe button wherever you enjoy your podcast. Dive deeper into real estate investing on Breneman Capital's website, breneman.com, where we have numerous free resources and information that can help both active and passive real estate investors. Accredited investors can get started today as a passive investor in our multifamily investment opportunities by hitting the Invest Now button on our website.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of Drew Breneman and guests as of the date of recording and do not purport to reflect the views or opinions of Breneman Capital LLC and its subsidiaries. Views and opinions are provided for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon or deemed as investment or tax advice or an offer to buy or sell securities. The speaker cannot be held responsible for any direct or incidental loss incurred by applying any of the information offered.